intermodal. That's very important. It's not just walkable, but they want, like it used to be, very efficient, easy. We had a lot of input from AATA about the transit center and where it should be placed. We thought we were going to be asked to put it in the center of the development. Turns out maybe we want it on Michigan Avenue. Facilitate a little more traffic up to, well, not traffic, but transit up to Depot Town. And yes, sorry about that. But this would be a transit-oriented development, as I said, and I'll get into more of that. Another really important thing to the design team was existing resources that are surrounding the site. Obviously, you have Waterside, Waterworks Park, Ford Lake. It's kind of a nice axis. Was really resonating with the design team. Kind of a neat thing you don't see, especially in Western design, is the focus on courtyards. You're going to see that in this design where they want people not only on the street, but also collecting in courtyards between buildings. So it's not just a massive big buildings, there's things in between, there's green, there's covered walkways in between buildings. I'm going to step it up a little bit. This is a really important slide. They see a great potential connection with Depot Town and a train station. If there is an international village here, I could see a train station being more of a possibility. I saw that train drive by, flying through, high speed, and all I could think of, it would be great if that train stopped here instead of shot through. The folks who want to see this happen, they want to make that happen too. And there's a lot of other things that they could probably make happen for Ypsilanti. Don't think of this as a one-shot deal where this is the only project that could come. If this comes, this will bring other things. And the city has a say in what that is. So I don't want you to forget about that. Another slide, I'm going to move it along. But this is the overall concept. I want to stress that this is a concept that we are working on. A lot of nights and actually weekends have been worked on this. It's kind of surprised to find Saturday is a big work day in China. But this is a little more detail in the concept. It's a green concept. There are over 600 tree plantings in that. It's not a concrete jungle. There's a lot of opportunities for stormwater management in a way that keeps water on site, keeps water in ponds. That's a huge objective with the landscape aesthetic. Solar power is a possibility. We need to evaluate that. I think there are actually some interested investors in that. How we incorporate it is going to be difficult, but as you can see, there's a lot of space. We might be able to incorporate it somehow. I already went over this concept. I want to get to these next pictures, give you an idea of what is being visioned. This is a vision, it's not the final, but they basically want to put a brand on this of an international village, international gate, welcoming people to Ypsilanti. The building you see on the right is a general business building. The intention is for that to house a corporation and retail. This is some pictures of the student housing, not quite the student housing we're used to building in Ann Arbor. It's a little more soft. I think Amy puts it very well when she says, in the northern part of China, she says it's more like a man. And the aesthetic we're going here is more like a woman. It's a little softer, a little more neighborhood friendly. It's going to be a variety of housing types. It's not all student housing. There's going to be private residences, other types of mixed-use rentals. And as I said before, everyone is welcome. So, wrong way. So how do we intend to finance this development? EB5 is direct foreign investment. It's underutilized in Michigan, and quite honestly, it's underutilized between the coasts. The purpose of EB5 was to target job creation in underserved communities in targeted employment areas. Targeted employment areas are basically census tracts that fit. And I have a big problem with the targeted employment areas that have gotten the EB5 financing because they're in Manhattan, they're in Washington, they're in San Francisco, they're in Las Vegas. Most of that funding has not come to the middle part of the country. Ypsilanti is a targeted employment area. Ypsilanti is one of the reasons for this program. This will be funded through the Regional Center Program. Regional Center Program allows pooled investment. So instead of one investor, they're all able to come together, and in that same way they're vetted. The U.S. Customs and Immigration Service does the vetting process. They find the sources of the funding, where that money came from, what the background of the investors are. It's very important to say no visas are awarded if job creation is not proven. And that's one thing we haven't talked about tonight, is job creation, what that means for Ypsilanti. No visas are provided until job creation is proven. Therein lies that 4 to 5 year wait. That's a lot of money to put on the table to wait a long time. In addition, the EB5 investor has to be at risk throughout the entire investment, and their investment is subordinate to all other forms of financing, so they're the last money out. That is a very risky investment. Investors are also seeking a relatively lower rate of return, close to zero compared to other developers that would do a project in your community. So they're not out here making money off Ypsilanti. They do want a visa. They still admire the United States. They still see real estate in the United States as a good investment. Infrastructure in the United States, real estate in the United States remains a strong investment, no matter what rhetoric you might hear. Crippled America, which I think is BS. This is still a good investment. The United States is still a great investment. So in return, for that lower return, they want to invest in a diverse international village that is comforting to them, their families, their culture, and other cultures. That is the crux of this development. Getting a little bit of weeds, but the USCIS, which is the Customs and Immigration Services, they have to do a pretty lengthy petition, 526 petition for each investor. That is a deep dive on everything of your background. This is a long process. Identifies where the source of the funds invested, looks into your background, criminal background, any associations you might have that aren't even in China or elsewhere. Wherever that is, they research that. So how much is coming to Ypsilanti through this? The target investment is $130 million. That means 260 investors are taking a huge risk on wanting to come to Ypsilanti. In order to actually get visas through that, 2,600 jobs must be demonstrated to be created. Now that's not a job that I can fill. It's construction jobs, it's jobs after the fact, it's folks who move here and become employees, immigrants who come here to become employees. That has to be proven in a short period of time. I can tell you, from a construction standpoint, we're probably talking 1,500 jobs that wouldn't be there if not for this project. That gets us gets us pretty close to the way there, but not the entire way. There are going to be jobs after this project is done that will need to be filled. The minimum total project cost to meet that threshold is $325 million. We can't spend less. We can't spend over the life of the project. So that's...
Can
That's a tall order.
Can I ask for clarification on that?
Absolutely.
While we're in this, I thought that each investor's investment had resulted in 10 permanent full-time jobs. So where does the construction jobs come in to that mix versus full-time?
The issue here is that those are calculated by USCIS and the Department of Treasury economists. Those are weeds I don't really know that much about. But indirect jobs through construction are counted. Indirect jobs off-site are also counted. So it's not only going to be jobs on site, there are jobs off-site that will be created. Now, how do they go about determining that? I don't know the equations and the algorithms that are involved.
I think we're going to want to know that. Can that information be addressed and sent to us, please?
Sure.
Okay, thank you.
Because I've read quite a bit from the EB5, federal website, et cetera, and they all say 10 full-time permanent jobs. Like permanent is listed there, which is different than the construction job stuff. So that's why.
Right.
Why stop at that point?
Yes, and we will get you that information.
Thank you.
So back to the rest of the story. The EB5 would be 40% of the project. Oh, the computers. My presentation was on a different computer. But anyway, the rest would come from senior equity from other investors, and it doesn't have to be in international, but most of them are. Conventional debt will be part of the remainder, and this does have a gap. This project does have a gap. A project this size in a community like Ypsilanti will have a gap, partially in due part to the contamination of the site, the challenges of the site, and we've identified 25% at least of gap incentives. And it's important to underline that we're not looking primarily for tax abatement or any kind of thing like that. Our priority is to focus on state and federal first. Typically on a development, you go the other way around. You get tax abatements first. We don't think that's quite fair to Ypsilanti. So we want to get state, federal incentives first and see if we need tax abatements last. So what is the total cost? Cutting me off again. The concept you saw today is $429 million that we estimate in terms of hard and soft costs. So we want to get a little closer to that $325 million threshold to make this project work. We have some work to do, like I said, with our domestic team, taking what the international team, Wanku, put together and trying to make it fit. The American code, American zoning, what the community wants, that's also very important. And we want to arrive at a development agreement that is respectful of not only the EB5 financing, but the community's wishes. In terms of the schedule, we've crunched a lot of numbers on what the schedule would be. This would be a very quick project, relatively, for a $300 million development. The reason why is for the EB5 calculations, we need to hit a 2.5-year window to get that investment put into Ypsilanti. So that's a lot of work to do in a short period of time. We've challenged ourselves not to be too optimistic in our calculations and what we can do in that time. So we do have a little bit of float to make this feasible, not just putting it on paper. Although that's going to be a 2.5-year period of intensive construction, it's going to be a 4-year project. Site work can start early. We hope to start site work in the summer, next summer. That would be removing contaminated materials, putting in new fill, starting foundations, moving dirt. Majority of the work would be completed in 2.5 years with first units online by 2020, fall of 2020. So it's not going to be turn the key, everything's open on day one. It's too big of a project for that. but we do anticipate full completion by summer 2022. I kind of mentioned it a little bit before why Ypsilanti. You know, at the main meeting I talked about proximity to education, proximity to the Motor City, proximity to the American Center for Mobility. Ypsilanti's got a lot of assets. You're all here because you see Ypsilanti as an asset. Ypsilanti is a welcoming community. But I wanted to talk about a couple other projects, why I think this is good. One is Hudson Yards. This is a massive project in Manhattan. It was a gerrymandered targeted employment area. This is where a lot of EB5 investment has gone. This is not international investors making these investments. These are New York developers. The guy who did this, his name's on one of the halls at Ross Business School at the University of Michigan. EB5 was a little tiny portion of this project. A little tiny, it was $800 million of the project was EB5 financing of a $17 billion project. This wasn't what the program was made to do. The program was not to build huge high-rises in Manhattan. EB5 was not made to build Trump Bay Street. That's not what this program was all about. And it's bothered me to see these kind of developments happen and us get passed over in the middle of the country. One that you probably don't hear about and you wouldn't know compared to those is the Inn at Harbor Shores. This is in St. Joseph. St. Joseph is on Lake Michigan. Lake Joseph is a very fine town. St. Joseph is a very fine town. It's also a very challenged town. It's had a lot of the same issues that Ypsilanti has had. Job loss. Whirlpool was a huge employer there. They cut back, that community took it hard. EB5 invested in this project in St. Joseph. It's the only one in Michigan that's actually been successful, partially because we don't get looked at that much. This was used as at-risk subordinate debt. The MEDC funded it. The MEDC supported it. It was well vetted. These are the type of projects that EB5 was made for. Actually, I want to get to move forward. I don't want to keep everyone here all night. Your assets are on display. As I said before, Ypsilanti is on the world stage now, which I see as a positive development. And I think that's going to come no matter what, because you have assets like Detroit, American Center for Mobility. It's going to come. I want to talk a little bit about the existing conditions, and I want to keep it kind of basic. When you talk about environmental, it gets really complicated, but our approach is very basic. The existing conditions on that site, the three main ones, we do know that there is been some talk of indigenous artifacts on site. We've kind of identified where those spots are. When we go to do the excavation, that will be in the specs to make sure that if we find anything, that will stop. Excavation of that portion will be more sensitive. We do that quite often, actually. And if you work on the campus of the University of Michigan, it's kind of a way of life. Another thing, there's a city sewer collector and water main. Those aren't just primarily serving this site. They serve other parts of the city. It's old. It's dated in the 1930s. Instead of just leaving it there, we want to move it, relocate it. And it's a city piece of infrastructure. We want to move that and relocate it as part of the project. And the other thing is there's a DT overhead line we have to bury. It's not cheap, but we're going to do it. Environmental issues are well documented. We had over 25 years of documents that we poured through, our consultant poured through. But we wanted to keep it simple for the reason we don't want to keep any contamination there if we don't have to. Mitigation, if you don't remove soils, can be really difficult. It can be really complicated. Our plan is to actually remove the contaminants and fill with good engineered fill. This actually helps us in the long run because there are not terrible soils, but not the best soils. And a lot of that development that was there actually 100 years ago wasn't there at the same grade. We found a lot of slabs 12 feet down. You see that in a lot of communities like this. I work in Saginaw Bay City. All the development once upon a time was 10 feet lower. I hypothesize that's what's going on here. That's why we're finding those slabs. If we can get all that out, along with the contamination, we'll have a better surface to work on. So I see it as a win-win. I think everyone looks at contamination as a bugaboo. When there's not a liable party, and the city is not a liable party, that can be a really helpful thing for a project. So what some folks might see as challenges, I see as an opportunity there. So with that, I want to take questions, but also if you wanted to go to the public hearing portion, I'd be fine with that too.
So you've given us most of it. There's much more there. Where we are in the? Okay. Are there any just first clarifying questions from City Council before we move into our public hearing, and then afterwards we'll have further questions and deliberation. I will start that. I wanted you to talk about where you are with projections of number of units of residences in particular. I know for student housing it was by beds, but where are those numbers now from what was projected in May?
Yeah, in terms of units, well, we have a unit count, we have a bed count. So units is about 1,100. Bed count is 1,750.
And that's among all the different types of housing, or just the
Yeah,
student housing?
and that includes a hotel, so 150 room hotel. That should change, and it will change. We have opportunity to get a little more density inside the buildings. Doesn't necessarily impact what the outside looks like, but the efficiency of the buildings is really important. And I see that as a little differentiation between the Chinese design and what we do here in America. So.
Thank you. Other questions from council at this time?
I have a question about the EB5, but it's something that I don't understand, which is, so the EB5 investor comes here, starts a business, okay, fulfills the role of their visa, and then do they leave? Do they stay? Do we get a rolling series of EB5 people here? I mean, what's the expectation by the development?
No, the EB5 is simply a visa. They don't have to maintain residency or anything like that. So they wouldn't say they physically come here all the time. A lot of times they do. I think one of the draws to this project is owning American real estate for the reason that it's a safe investment. If you want to really get into international politics, there's a lot going on in China as far as what their economy is like. The United States remains a solid investment. So I think that's where you get a lot of the interest. Investors do things for a lot of different reasons, and if I could tell you what all 260's motivations are, I'd be wrong, because I don't really know.
Thank you. The second question I have is about the management of the student housing in the hotel. Is that going to be, is there going to be a company that's going to be hired to manage those facilities? What's that going to?
Yeah, and it would be, there would actually be an international and domestic team for that. Not only marketing in China, but also here. We do anticipate that folks are going to be interested in this development just from the way it's designed, the quality, the walkability. It's going to be pretty one of a kind for what gets done around, in the United States. It's going to really set itself apart from Ann Arbor. We do a lot of work in Ann Arbor, and Ann Arbor's got a lot of issues that this project won't have. So it will set itself apart. I do see a domestic market for it.
Can I ask a clarifying question on that first, or do you want to ask?
Well, I didn't quite hear who's going to manage the property once it's open. Is that this investment team, or is there going to be an outside company that's going to come in and manage it, or is the hotel going to be independently owned? Are those questions figured out yet? Am I too preliminary on those questions?
Yeah, it's not going to be one entity running the whole development. So there will be an operator for the hotel, there will be an operator for the student housing. Who that is, it's not solidified at this point, but the intention is to have the most qualified operator.
Okay, thank you.
And as related to that, so is the ownership, so is the plan for the International Village to retain ownership of everything, of something, of, you know, is the grocery store ownership of the property still retained by, but then a grocer comes in and rents, or will some of the ownership transfer, both for residents and commercial?
Primarily, initially, it's going to be International Village because that's the conditions of EB5. But once a development goes through a certain stage of growth, parts of it can be sold, parts of it you can maintain a supermarket that you rent. There's lots of different ways that this could work. There's no intended way.
So let me feed that back to you because I think that's an important point to make sure I'm getting it. So via the EB5 requirements, the ownership would be retained by the International Village.
Yes, in a form.
Okay. Councilmember Murdoch and then Councilperson Richardson.
Mine is
Okay. Can you use the mic?
You said that it would, I'm sorry. You said that it would be sold, but then you said that it would be, the ownership would be retained by the EB5, which is,
It may be sold. I'm not saying it will be sold.
no, I didn't say you said it will be, I said you said it can be sold.
Yeah,
Right.
After a certain period of time?
after
Is
a
that-
certain period of time.
Right.
Which is what? Do you know what that period of time is?
Okay.
It depends on the length of the project, 4 to 5 years.
So then if the ownership is to be retained by this body, that means this entity has the ability to specify things in leases to operators of a grocery store, a restaurant, et cetera, around things I know we care about, like wages and local hiring, et cetera. Would that be
I think so. That's getting into...
as per state law allows that to
Yeah,
happen at least?
it's getting above the construction guy's head.
Well, I think that's an important point as
Yep.
we talk about some of those values here, and we'll potentially continue to talk about that, is that if it's a project where, hey, we're going to build it and then sell it to someone else, where we can't control any of those things, that's a different set of factors for what a development agreement that may work for this community looks like. So that's what I want to clarify. Thank you. Councilmember Murdoch?
Yeah, I didn't get quite hear what you said on what the number of units was going to be, what type.
So, as far as what type, I can give you a full breakdown. Those numbers have changed so much over the last 3 months through iterations that I don't have them fresh off me. But the unit, as it stands right now, is 1,100 units, 1,750 beds. Now that's going to change because we need to get more efficient on the buildings. But it's dense in certain areas and less dense in other areas. And I think it's a great start. It's pretty appropriate for that size site. But we have work to do, no doubt. And 150 of those are in a hotel. I just should make that point.
Thank you. Other clarifying questions? Councilmember Robb?
Yeah, this is back to the EB5 visa program. Okay, so the jobs created by the EB5 visa holders who come here to find employment, they can move anywhere and it counts against the 2,600 jobs created. It's not 2,600 jobs created in this area or this state. It's created just job creation.
No, that's not quite correct. They are not counted as a job. If they move.
Well, when you were describing that earlier, you were talking about the EB5 visa holders, the students who come here to find employment counted towards that, so.
Those aren't, yeah, the students that would be.
But not the students who come here, but the way you started describing it before, that's why I led to that line of questioning. So if you are, if you move here on a EB5 visa, find employment, that does not count towards job creation.
No.
Mr. Erna, can you clarify, I don't know if you were in here when we were asking the clarification about the jobs, so the projected jobs. My understanding in reading and researching is that it's 10 permanent, a minimum of 10 permanent full-time jobs. They define full-time as 35 hours or above per investor. Wayne was sharing that construction jobs somehow are permanent, and we really need, like, to me, that's a super important point to clarify.
So how it works is through the development of the regional center. The regional center is monitored by the Department of Treasury. When the final number of investors is created through the center, the Department of Treasury will break out how many construction jobs can be counted. So they have to be 2 years. There are a small percentage of jobs relative to the total. There are a percentage of jobs that are construction-based for the project that will count towards, if we use a number of 2,600, a percentage will go to that 2,600. The rest of the jobs, as determined by the Department of Treasury, will have to be permanent, ongoing positions. They're monitored through the full 5 to 7 years of the visa program. So when someone submits to be part of an EB-5 investor, they're submitting an application with an investment. That investment's monitored for 5 to 7 years, whether the number of jobs that are created and whether the infrastructure is completed. Once that happens, they're given an application to visa. So it is not a direct visa, here's your money, here's your visa. Okay, it's a long-term program that's monitored throughout the process. Those numbers are not created until the regional center is created. But to answer Mr. Robb's question completely, the jobs are not tied to the person making application for the visa. That person does not count as the person for the job. The student who's coming over, that's an I-9. That's done through the school systems. That's not done through an EB-5 visa.
The Councilmember Robb was clarifying that the jobs are the jobs on site.
Plus,
They're not like this investor happens to create some other jobs in Kalamazoo and that counts.
right. So, and even more important to that is the jobs and the investment is tied to the regional center in which the area is defined. So that would be Water Street, but it would be Water Street plus downtown. So if the infrastructure results in something created off-site, AKA a train station or a train platform, the jobs can extend. There has to be a first or secondary connection to the development, and it has to be a clear line connection for the jobs to count.
Okay, so, and we define what that, can you say more about this regional center thing? We haven't really heard that sort of the definition of that part of the process, and then I'll go to Councilmember to share.
So the regional center is created in zones that have high impacts of poverty, or have low census figures of income. So the city of Ypsilanti is qualified for a regional center. A regional center is not a physical location, but rather it is equivalent to a bank. So I can equate this to like an escrow. So it becomes a corporation that takes in the investment. The investment is monitored through the Department of Treasury. We also would be an active monitor within that regional center. So we would see the money that comes in, and then through the development process, there's only certain qualified infrastructure. So that's public infrastructure, public benefiting infrastructure. That's the roads, that's the water lines, that's the electric. It's the infrastructure portions of the project that are public. So it serves as a escrow account. So as the development goes forward and let's say River Road is extended, the developer is able to withdraw from those funds for that part of the project. So those withdrawals are made, done by the developer, and then the job creation for the temporary construction job, plus whatever job creation comes out of the project. So the hotel jobs, right? The hotel is a direct linkage to the infrastructure of the program. The hotel jobs would be qualifying jobs. So going back to the regional center is actually a financial structure. It's the financial structure that I equate in a simplified language as an escrow center. It essentially functions as escrow. There are best practices. Those best practices include auditing and monitoring. If we progress to a development agreement, I will present those best practices, and we will go forward. We will contact Kalamazoo, we will contact Royal Oak, we will contact Toledo, and find out what they put in place.
Thank you. Councilmember Bashir? Okay, let me then ask one more question about that. So again, to clarify, the city of Ypsilanti is qualified in its entirety, but we would choose to define the regional center more narrowly via our DDA districts, via some perimeter from the project. How would that be?
And this is a learning curve that I'm in right now. I don't know if it's done such as a TIF. This is a learning process for me, and that this is where I don't know the next step.
Okay, so this is really key because 2,600 jobs can mean a lot of different things. Okay, so and I didn't understand everything you said.
Okay, I'm sorry.
In the interest of, no, it's all me. I really take that on. But, so let me say what I think I heard. Okay, so if the lot has to hire 2 more restaurants because they're getting a lot more business, that counts as job creation for EB5?
It depends if it's a direct linkage. So what I would say more likely is if a train platform were to be built and we were to have to provide ongoing maintenance or additional public works.
Or if AATA had to hire more bus drivers?
Yes.
If AATA had to hire more bus drivers to service this new population?
That would be a direct link.
On the other hand, it's a little unclear to me because it's 60-40, right? 60-40 students and EB5. So only, percent, you know what I'm saying?
Right, but
Yeah, so it's, yeah.
there's still, the maximum investment in a regional center is 40% of the complete project. So 40%, could be a number that increases if the project costs grow. But the development team has identified a minimum amount of investment to go forward. Within that minimum, the number we're talking about this time is 260. That equates to 2,600 jobs.
So at what time in the timeline, at what point in the timeline of this particular project will we find out what those percentages are and what that breakdown might be?
So at the point of a development agreement.
So that's in December?
Right.
Okay.
Well, potentially in December, but that's going to be based on, the development itself, the project costs.
I mean, it means it's, depending on how this breaks down, like if it's construction, which I do not view as a permanent job, but I've never been in construction, so construction people may have a different perspective than I do, okay? But that said, I don't view it as a permanent job, but if the EB5 program does, and we get 260 businesses that come here and it results in 12 jobs, that's going to mean a different thing than 2,600.
Yeah, they absolutely don't. So the construction jobs that are counted, again, is a percentage of the total investment, but noting that the construction jobs are ongoing. So they're ongoing for a 2-year period. So that's providing experience, that's providing bidding opportunities, that's providing options for local employment. It's a percentage, it's a percentage of the total. But those construction jobs are key to the project.
Okay, the construction jobs are key to the project, but they're going to end once the project is completed. But they still are counted in the 2,600 permanent jobs?
No, the rules of the program call it out very specifically as two separate things. There's temporary construction jobs, and then there's permanent job creation. That is, what I can't answer you right now if that's negotiated through the Treasury or if it's set by the regional center, okay? That's what I can't answer.
So we're not going to get a complete answer tonight, but so for the second time, I'm just going to say this is going to be a key question for us. And the sooner we can get that information, the better.
Yeah, absolutely.
And just to go back, and I agreed with you, Councilmember Bashir, that, you know, if the estimate is that this would be 1,500 construction jobs, and there were 2,600 total, so that would be 1,100 remaining permanent jobs by their estimates of what the construction scope would be at this point.
Yeah, I mean,
I agree, I want those numbers.
I mean, it could, but it couldn't. If they throw in the train station, you know, or if they throw in, you know, expanding River Street, I mean, there's all kinds of different ways in which that could be. So it is going to be pretty key.
But from a critical path perspective, we can't know that until the regional center is created, which you can't do before without a purchase agreement, right? Am I
Right.
just trying to clarify order of operations?
You are correct.
Councilperson Richardson.
So you're extending the jobs into the platform, the train platform, and the train station and all that, even though those are already parts of our plans that we have, you know, been working on, they would be counted as part of the jobs?
The example I'm giving is if the development funded the train platform, not if it was something we've done. So, right, yeah. So, I mean, I'm just using that because it's off-site.
So,
So before we go further in, I'm going to move to extend the meeting to midnight.
is there a second?
Move to extend the meeting.
A motion to extend. Here we are. That was seconded by Councilmember Vogt. All in favor of motion to extend till midnight, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. I think there was a question over there from Councilmember Robb.
Yeah, so I'm sort of going to switch topics here. 25% of your gap funding is incentives, that's $80 million. Can you quickly or briefly describe what that entails, how much that's public money? You talked about how you would go for state and federal money first, but then you might come back to the city. What kind of things would you be asking from the city?
But I want to make a point of thing, because I looked that up when that came up, is that the purchase agreement includes an agreement that it will not come back to the city for brownfield. It's part of one of those
Well,
base
I'm going
things.
to talk about that after we have the public hearing. But I'm just looking for, but it's still $80 million of public money, and this could be a topic of discussion for the public hearing.
Yeah, I mean, there's inherently a gap in this project. It's a lot of new construction for the revenues that'll be there. But our intention is to go after federal tax credits, so the New American Tax Credit Program. Very robust program. You can use that for about, I think on this deal, you'd be at 20 to 25% alone. This also would be very competitive for the transformational brownfield, which was passed by the state of Michigan. There aren't a lot of projects that are going to move really quick with that one. This one's ready. What's that?
It's my understanding the transformational brownfield tax credit applies to projects that are $500 million.
Not in communities under 25,000.
Oh.
So you could do I think, the threshold here is 25 million?
And where does that money come from? If Dan Gilbert's money came from,
The Michigan Strategic Fund.
okay, that would not come from any local money, unlike Detroit city income tax.
Not that I'm aware of. But that's the thinking. I do think with the contamination, a TIF is well within the realm of possibility. That really helps the project. And there's a lot of contamination there. Those costs. The site remediation, we had like $9 million, and the eligible cost for the TIF would be, 25. Need to do a lot more calculation there, but that's just from the hip. But yeah, I mean, the intention is to go with federal and state. I think this community deserves it for a lot of the reasons I talked about. The EB5 program's original intent, no matter what you have to say, it's changed. And I think it's about time communities like Ypsilanti got their part of that program. One thing I did want to clarify, the EB5 job creation is not a guarantee. That is a threshold that needs to be made for the visas to come to the investors. Say the project only creates 2,200 jobs. It still comes to Ypsilanti. They're not going away. Certain investors who invested aren't getting their visas. So it's not a guarantee. 2,200 jobs is a lot of darn jobs. So it's not a guarantee of jobs. I want to clarify that. But whether they come or not, you know, the project will be here still. And because that is the case, because they have to create a number of jobs for that, they're motivated to make this a successful development.
Councilmember Bashir?
Just a quick question. How much, I know that some of the properties, especially along the river, are intended for ownership, not rental. Do we know how many, or just a percentage or an idea of how
Right
many?
now,
that would be?
those units, there's 110 units.
Okay.
That are, because there's some are apartments and some are condos, right?
Yep.
Along the river. So
Along
some
the
are owned,
river.
some are rented.
Yep, along the river would be 110, and there's actually two kind of types of units. One's going to be facing the new Water Street, which will be along kind of the same alignment, and then the rest will be along the river. So there's kind of two rows.
Great, thank you. I would like to move to our public hearing. Thanks, guys, for sticking with us. Welcome to council. Hopefully you'll stick with us till the end. Our meetings always generally start at 7, and we're often out by midnight. So I've got a sign-up list here. I will start there. If you would like to pass, feel free. And I will then take others from the audience. So, Ari, Ellen, Enner? F-E-N-E-R, is that what I'm reading?
It's pronounced Alan Fuer. Thank you.
F-E, that's F-E-U-E-R?
That's right.
Got it, thank you.
Hi, my name is Ari Alan Fuer. I live at 986 Madison Street, and I've been a proud resident of the First Ward of Ypsilanti for 6 years. I'd like to thank Mayor Edmonds, the council, and everyone here for participating in this decision. I'd like to thank the developers for briefing us, and I'd like to thank whoever arranged the new microphone. Much better than yesterday. I'm here to make 2 points about the purchase agreement resolution which the council is considering at its meeting tonight. Firstly, I think the council should approve the directive to sign the purchase agreement. Of the many arguments which have been levied against the proposed Water Street development, by far the most convincing has been the complaint that the terms of the deal are obscure and that the council should do more to take input from the community before it commits to a final deal. I agree with this criticism. The text of the proposed purchase agreement has only been available for a short time, and critical details are only being presented by the developers tonight. However, the execution of this preliminary purchase agreement is an appropriate venue in which to resolve these concerns. This agreement does not execute the sale yet. It's contingent on the successful outcome of a negotiation process for a development agreement between the city and the developers, which will specify the terms of the final deal, including affordable housing, renewable energy, parking, and other issues. This process will last months, and the council should commit to an extensive series of public meetings on all the important topics in the negotiation during the first period of this time. Following this, a complete text of the proposed development agreement should be released, with sufficient time remaining for public comment to influence the final outcomes. This process will be a marathon for sure, but this course remains the best opportunity for the council to take broad public input on every important matter before the agreement is final, without stopping the negotiation process before it's even begun. Secondly, I would like to mention 4 issues which I think should be addressed in the final agreement. Firstly, the language prohibiting brownfield reimbursement from being sought should be stronger. Right now, the developers can demand brownfield expense reimbursement and pay only an extra $120,000, while the expenses might be $8 million. Secondly, the development mandate should allow the city the option to reclaim the property if it remains undeveloped beyond the agreed period, instead of demanding payment from the developers. Thirdly, the development should contain enough parking to meet the needs of the residents and businesses so that street parking in the area is not jammed. Fourthly, on affordable housing, I will propose a compromise. The council, while it should not prevent development with a sustainable housing requirement on the Water Street site itself, should consider creating a tax increment financing arrangement to direct a portion of the incremental tax revenue from this development to affordable housing projects elsewhere in the city once the Water Street bonds have been paid off, and should take public input on this proposal. By approving the preliminary sale agreement now and taking public input on these and other points during the negotiating process on the final development agreement, the council can have the best chance to make a good final deal that we as a city can be proud of. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Savannah Gaines. After that, Nathaniel Romero. And so move on. Who's on deck? Who can be ready to come up quickly? Or already come up and wait is Robert Voorhees next after that.
Alrighty. Cool. Everybody wake up. Alright, so I got some notes. I'm going to look at them kind of carefully to go through. First of all, I would like to thank council members, especially Councilmember Bashir and Councilmember Vogt, for their thorough questions. I appreciate y'all taking the time for that. Thank you so much. First of all, I want to say that for how much we talked about affordable housing the past couple days and how much there has been an expressed desire for affordable housing to be in this development, it was not mentioned at once during the questions or from the developer. So I asked the developer right at this point, are you interested in including affordable and low-income housing in this development? And I heard one remark about how a lot of nights and weekends were spent working on this. And one reason I do not support there being a purchase agreement without a community benefits agreement and an affordability process already in place is that those nights and weekends were basically wasted without having enough community say to guide that process. Yeah, it's cool that there's a bunch of technically savvy people all over the world working on this stuff, but are they in communication with the residents? Y'all can work on something within your own bubble, but the process is flawed from the beginning without a community benefits agreement in place. And I understand that, that this isn't a done deal, but it would be a much, 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 much better deal if we had community input from the beginning and we outlined at the beginning what we want for this community. And I think that it's clear that they weren't thinking about us at all during this time. I will also say that I've seen a lot of talk about it being a welcoming place, but it doesn't seem like it's a place that's, the welcoming part is welcome to Ypsilantians, and that's a huge concern. That has been the number one concern throughout this past couple days. And one way that this place needs to be welcoming is it something where the most vulnerable Ypsilantians can feel like they can put a home? Is it a place where we feel like we can shop? Is it a place where it feels like we can have jobs that give us a living wage? This is why we need a community benefits agreement early on, well before a letter of intent is even given. We need to develop this stuff before, and that is why I encourage council to vote no, because their due diligence prior to this whole process has not been done. And I would encourage us as a community to actively work on developing a plan for what we want. Thank you so much.
Robert Voorhees is next. Next up is Elisa Guyton. So if you're next up, if you'd come up here, so we can have you ready and queued up. Go as efficiently as possible. Thank you. Good evening.
Good evening. My name is Robert Voorhees. I live at 432 South Adams Street. A lot of things have been said about the affordability components, and I agree with most of them. I did prepare a statement about my concerns with the EB5 investment program. When I look at the national news over the last year, I see two things. One, our federal government has ramped up the deportation of undocumented immigrants and attempted to ban travel from several majority Muslim countries, while at the same time, in an effort to court the right immigrants, Jared Kushner spent several days meeting with Chinese investors to promote the EB5 visa program. Then I look at the local news and I see news stories of longtime residents being detained and taken from their families by ICE, and I see Ypsilanti city officials planning a trip to China to meet with EB5 investors. While I recognize your motivations are different here, the optics of this move make me deeply uncomfortable. In fact, I'm uncomfortable with the city participating in EB5 program in any capacity. When you travel to China, I urge you to keep the following questions in mind. Did any of these investors meet with Jared Kushner or with Rick Snyder, who just traveled to China to also promote the program in Michigan specifically? If so, what did they talk about? What were they promised? These two people are two whose entire staffs and possibly themselves are suspects of the most notorious criminal investigations in the country right now, and they're the two most prominent voices spearheading this promotion of this program. Mayor, council members, by inviting EB5 investment into our city, you risk tying the city to the openly racist immigration policies and tactics of the current federal government, and I urge you to not be blinded by dollar signs and to find a better solution for the Water Street problem. Thank you.
Ashley Fox, I think went home with his kid earlier. Next up is Chris Brown, and then Carter and Nancy Good after that. Is Chris Brown still with us? Carter and Nancy Good. Alice Elliott?
Mayor, good. I have a copy of the letter from your son, which they wanted to read. Would it be appropriate?
Go for it.
I'm going to lean forward here. Nancy and Carter Good are local residents. Their son, John Good, graduated Ypsi High School in 2006. He is an urban planner living in Singapore for the last 5 years. He works as a transportation and land use consultant for the World Bank, international level urban planning. His letter to all of us in the council says, I've been following the Water Street redevelopment project for nearly 15 years, starting from the Biltmore plan through the recent efforts as part of the Shape Ypsi master planning revision process. I think that this international village plan is one of the most promising proposals in years and would add significantly to the community if designed well. He goes on to go through a number of technical or not so technical recommendations that city planners and the developers consider. I suspect most of them were already in discussion. Things like bike share, hidden parking, minimal setbacks on the nav, a number of things like that that are intended to create better public space and better public access, primarily. He concludes, on the whole, the International Village Plan is exciting and a promising step forward for Water Street after many years. This year's village proved that citizens want to move into the future with confidence, and securing a development agreement for this proposal is clearly positive. Ensuring that the public's interest is protected and if and when public property is transferred is essential for maintaining that trust and building community here.
Thank you. Next up we have Alice Elliott, and on deck is Brian Foley.
Did you call it Casey earlier?
I did not.
Oh, okay.
So Alan, I don't think I have a Casey on this list, but there will be a chance once we've got through everyone on this list to take others from the audience. So next up, Alice Elliott, and then Brian Foley. Are either of those folks still here? Not. Next up, Ann Fowler. That's it. Ann. Shane McFarland. Oh, Brian Foley.